All right. Today's Moby-Dick lecture is called Beauty and the Kingdom of Damage. Beauty and the Kingdom of Damage. All right, we've made it through some of the more anatomically interesting chapters on the cassock and the squeeze of the hand, and now we're on to this wonderful chapter called the doubloon. At this point, as a reader, you have certainly realized that you have a front row seat to this kind of command performance in Moby-Dick. And that in order to appreciate all of this, right, you've got to know John Locke and Immanuel Kant and Shakespeare and Job and Plato and so much more. And the book is just like a giant floating conversation, a kind of like great books seminar with everything ever written on the table. And there are also, though, these moments of levity and scatological humor, like the cassock chapter, that balance out the tone. There's a Roman playwright named Terence, and he has a line, just sort of a throwaway line in one of his plays, where he says, "Nothing human is alien to me. Nothing human is alien to me." I mean, that could be the motto of Moby-Dick, right? If somebody somewhere has thought it, or could have thought it, or could have done it, no matter how outlandish, it seems to sort of make it into this book. Nothing human is alien to this book. Here, and this is part of why it's so long and capacious. But at this point, we're drawing to the end of our whaling chapters, where Ishmael is riffing on different aspects of a whaler's life and of whales. And we're going to very soon here, start the final chase scene, the final hunt of Moby-Dick. So we just have a few more of these whaling chapters to go, but they are some good ones. And we're going to start here with the doubloon. This is a particularly interesting chapter to read because it is, in a sense, a chapter about how to read. So we're reading a chapter about how to read. It is important to remember, though, that books are not the only thing that we read, right? We also read moments. We read the situation. We read the world around us all the time. The world is a kind of text that's written in pictures, right? It's written in hieroglyphics. Your experience is a kind of text, and you're engaged in this process of reading with it all the time. That's all philosophy is, really, in a way. It's like trying to learn to read your experience rightly. We all experience the same world, and we all read it so differently. So, for example, the character Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec at one point looks into the camera and he tells us that the Moby-Dick is his favorite story because it's about a guy trying to kill an animal. And when he says this, he's not just telling us something about the book, right? He's really telling us about himself. He's saying that he likes hunting and that he thinks, art is kind of a waste of time. And he prefers to live in a world where truth is simple and straightforward and black and white, and it's not mediated by symbols and metaphors and language and all the stuff that we dive into in literature class. So Ron Swanson, not just making a claim about the book, Moby-Dick, he's making a claim about the world, about what the world is fundamentally like as he sees it. And he's also making a claim about himself, right? This is why we say sometimes that literature is a mirror. The way you read it reveals who you are, right? It's interesting in that way. That's part of why we do it. It's part of why we say that literature helps make us wise. It reveals us to ourselves when we read it, and when we write about it and talk about it. So question then, when you approach Moby-Dick, what do you see here? The answer to that is the beginning of knowing yourself, right? The book is prismatic. It contains all these multitudes. It can reflect back many different things. But what do you see? Do you see a long digressive story about whaling that you have to read for school? That's certainly one way to read it. Or do you catch glimmers here and there of something more? Does it open up a kind of depth dimension in your thoughts, a new sense of the world, a kind of sense of the world's vastness and possibility, or of your own vastness and possibility? Those are ways that the book could help you read yourself and know yourself. The doubloon passage in particular is really explicitly about this act of interpretation, of interpreting the world, and interpreting, I guess, the text itself too. You may recall a few chapters back, Ahab has nailed this golden doubloon to the main mast, and he's promised to give it to whoever spots the white whale, Moby-Dick. So far, nobody has seen the whale, maybe just like a spirit spout that is, leading them on, tempting them. But the boat is full of like these rough and tumble, cutthroat sailor types. And yet nobody has like stolen this coin either. It's been just sitting there nailed to the mast, and you think somebody would like, these guys are kind of mercenary types. But no, they're in awe of it. They're in awe of this bloom. It's become kind of invested with associations of the whale, right? Like it's a talisman that represents Moby Dick. So now here in this chapter, many hundreds of pages later, after Ahab first did this, we're going to start to see them coming forward to take a closer look at the doubloon and speak what's on their minds now as they gaze at the coin in their monologues. We get this like better sense, not only for like the characters, because they're sort of like reading themselves, interpreting themselves, but also for like this new respect for this process of reading and interpreting reality that we're all undertaking all the time. And we're all trying to get better at, right? Want to get better at this. Why do we want to get better at this? What is at stake here exactly? Well, take a look at the bottom of page 440. This is chapter 99 on the doubloon. This is the end of the second paragraph in the chapter. And Ishmael sort of lets us know that something big is at stake here. He says, some certain significance lurks in all things, else all things are little worth, and the round world itself but an empty cipher, except to sell by the cartload, as they do the hills about Boston to fill up some morass in the Milky Way. You get it? Some certain significance lurks in all things, else all things are little worth. If we cannot do this, if we can't find the significance in things that Ishmael asserts is there, is lurking in things, then what is the world but like a set of price tags? Things are of little worth. They're a cipher, right? And so things are only worth like what somebody's going to pay for them in the absence of having like a meaningful connection, a significant connection to the world, right? If you don't have these kind of thick, deep, meaningful interactions with the world, then the world becomes a kind of cipher. All you're left is this price tags that can tell you the value of something, and this ends up becoming a kind of nihilism, right? So it's sort of a choice. Ishmael puts forward this choice of like interpret the world and find meaning in it, or try to live without meaning, which ends up being a kind of like empty consumerism, which experience tells us does not actually satisfy, right? So in order to live in this world without despair, we need to be able to find the significance, to interpret the significance that lurks in all things, right? I get it. It's fun to buy things. I love buying things, but it's only fun to buy things because those things end up being meaningful to you, right? You give them to somebody else, or you hold on to them for many years, or they come to symbolize something, or it becomes very valuable to you through use. But it's not just like the buying. The buying itself is empty, right? That's just the exchange of numbers, of money. And Ishmael wants us to engage with the world in a deeper sense than this, to look beneath the surface and interpret its significance. Don't forget that the symbol for all of this is a doubloon, right? It's a coin. It's a gold coin. It's money that they're trying to read the significance of. They're trying to figure out what is the significance like behind this piece of money. And the significance is there lurking within the money, somewhere for us to find. And this is like so much of the task of life is finding the significance here. Remember, there's like a passage in Thoreau's Walden. He says like two guys are going for a walk in the woods, and one guy decides, I could like really, cut down these woods and like sell them for a lot of money. And he is considered an industrious and enterprising citizen. Whereas the person who goes for a walk in the woods and feels at home there is considered like lazy and, good for nothing loafer. And Thoreau says, that person has made the world into a home. Whereas the person who just knows the price of the woods and knows how to like buy it, sell it, has lost a home. So this is what is at stake, is our ability to live in the world meaningfully. No big deal. Nothing big or anything. this is an old idea, right? It does you no good to gain the world and sell your soul. So we've heard that before, but then so Melville's going to give us some bite here. How exactly do we gain the world? How do we get better at living in a world of significance and not just a world of like emptiness and nihilism and prices? So how do we gain the world? Philosophers actually have a special term for this. Of course they do. And that term is hermeneutics. This is just a fancy word, hermeneutics, that means something that we all, fancy word, hermeneutics, that means something that we all know about. It's just like theories of interpretation, right? There's a bunch of different ways you could interpret something, and your like approach to interpreting something is your hermeneutic. It's exactly what we're engaged in when we're reading literature, but it's also what we're engaged in all the time in the world. It's what the shipmates are explicitly engaged in this de Bloom chapter, interpretation, hermeneutics. The key thing to understand about hermeneutics, you've probably heard me talk about this before, is the hermeneutic circle. Okay, this is a concept that is key, called the hermeneutic circle. Picture a circle, or like a feedback loop between yourself and the world. The world is constantly impressing itself upon my senses, and I am constantly forming thoughts, forming those impressions into sort of thoughts, which then go back out into the world and color what I end up seeing there. And so that's the circle, right? The world comes into me. I form impressions about it, and then those impressions, in part, determine what I'm looking for and what I see when I look at the world. This is all very intuitive, very straightforward. The idea here, though, is that the world the world is not just like the thing that exists out there. The world has two components to it. It has an objective component, which is the stuff that exists out there in itself, but it also has a subjective component, right? What I bring to it helps sort of like determine the significance that I find there. So in other words, for hermeneutical philosophy, the truth is not just a matter of the objective facts or of like my subjective self, like my truth, how I feel about the facts. The truth is a kind of circular interplay between these two, between the objective facts of the world and my subjective self. And in that like sort of dynamic dialectical feedback loop, that's where truth happens, right? The facts themselves mean nothing. The facts have no significance. They're just there. On the contrary, it's the facts that require interpretation. They require us to engage them and imbue them with significance. So, my interpretation without the facts would mean nothing, right? It has to be, my interpretation has to be grounded in the facts, but the facts themselves don't mean anything without my interpretation. Thus, understanding is like a circular process. Do you see the circle? In this circular process, I'm just trying to get it right. I'm trying to see the world rightly, to see it, to make it meaningful to me. This is what we're engaged in all the time. Some of us are kind of like doing it better than others at various points. A lot of philosophers think, I know for me, most of the time, I'm a little bit self-interested in the way that I approach the world. And I tend to interpret everything in terms of like, how is it going to affect me? And that's going to color what I see there and maybe cause me to like see it wrongly and like miss some stuff. Myself gets in the way of the objective reality. But also, if you don't have a strong enough self to bring there, you're not going to know how to put that reality together. So it's a delicate balance. There is no more important task in the moral life than in some ways learning to like set aside our own self-interested vision and to be able to really look, to see reality as accurately as possible. This is exactly what Ahab sort of fails to do in this passage here. This is the bottom of 441. Instead of the self looking and seeing the world, the self looks out and only really sees the self. Ahab sees himself everywhere he goes in this coin. So this is the bottom of 441, and to set this up a little bit, the coin has like 3 mountains on it, and like one of them has a volcano on it, another one has a tower on it, the other one has a bird on it, like an eagle or something. And so it's like there's 3 towers, and they all have a different thing on it, and each of the shipmates is going to kind of look and see something different in those towers or in those mountains. Here's Ahab. Man, this is just some of the best writing ever. This is the last paragraph on 441. Ahab approaches the doubloon, and he's alone at night, and he's looking at it. I think it's at night. Anyway, he looks and he says, there's something ever egotistical in mountaintops and towers and all the other grand and lofty things. In other words, egotistical, right? He only sees his self, his ego in them. He says, look here, 3 peaks as proud as Lucifer. The firm tower, that is Ahab. The volcano, that is Ahab. And the courageous, the undaunted, the victorious, foul, that too is Ahab. All are Ahab. And this round gold is but the image of a rounder globe, which, like a magician's glass to each and every man in turn, but mirrors back his own mysterious self. So Ahab is sort of asserting the primacy of the self over the world, that what matters is to be able to look at the world and imbue it with your own meanings, your own sense of self. And we get that this is part of why he is sort of a demonic character, a monomaniacal character, but also a heroic character, because the hero is able to sort of like impress his vision, his selfhood, his version of reality onto reality. And that's something that's heroic and also demonic at the same time. That's where Ahab's at. Next up, we have Starbuck. How differently Starbuck sees this. Starbuck says, and this, I love that before Starbuck observes the coin, he observes Ahab observing the coin. And he says, the old man seems to read Belshazzar's awful writing, right? From the book of Daniel, one of the prophets. And he says, I have never marked the coin inspectingly. He goes below, let me read. So he's watching Ahab's looking at the coin, then going below decks, and Starbuck's like, okay, my turn. I'm next in line to interpret this coin. Here's what Starbuck sees. This is the middle of 442, 2.5 pages into chapter 99. Starbuck says, a dark valley between 3 mighty heaven-abiding peaks that almost seem the Trinity in some faint earthly symbol. So in this veil of death, God girds us round, and over all our gloom, the sun of righteousness still shines like a beacon of hope. If we bend down our eyes, the dark veil shows her moldy soil, but if we lift them up, the bright sun meets our glance halfway to cheer, etc., etc. He says, the coin speaks wisely, mildly, truly, but still sadly to me. I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely. I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely. Okay, a couple things to notice here. First, Ahab looks at the coin and sees himself. Starbuck looks at the coin, or the world, and sees God, right? He sees the Trinity. He sees 3 peaks, and he says, it's almost like the Trinity, and like God is going to be the sun of righteousness that shines a beacon of hope onto us. And this tells us, Starbuck is a pious man of faith. And yet, look at the last lines of it, where he says, the coin speaks to me, sadly still, I will quit it, lest truth shake me falsely. Starbuck only looks at the world long enough, only looks at the coin long enough to see God there, and then he's got that, and then he sort of like turns away. He doesn't really want to look any further at the facts, at the truth, because he's afraid, right? He says, I will quit it lest the truth shake me falsely. He's afraid that something in the truth is not of God, and that might sort of like be dangerous to his faith. He says, he does not dare to look too closely. Right? He doesn't want his faith to be contradicted. He just wants to see the sort of like comforting sight of God, and he's going to turn away and keep his faith, even at the cost of sacrificing his experience. For some people, this might make Starbuck a hero, that he, looks at the world, and I know the world has like a lot of harsh stuff in it, but he looks and he's like just wills himself into seeing God there and keeping his faith. And he's not going to like look too hard, and he's just going to let faith oust fact and just like believe. There are intimations that Melville thinks that this kind of faith is something less than real faith. Melville is interested in real faith. Starbuck might not have it. There's a certain kind of faith that tries to like stand outside of a situation and doesn't really confront the truth of it because it's afraid that the truth might not confirm what it already believes about God. The so much of the chapters about, the tail and don't look into the whale's face are, if you look into the whale's face, if you look into the face of God, it might not be what you expect, and it might explode all of the things that you thought about the world, about God, all of this stuff. So be careful. And Starbuck is careful, right? He's pragmatic, he's cautious, and so he turns away before looking at the doubloon too closely might give him some other ideas. So Starbuck has a kind of faith, but it may be an incomplete faith. It's maybe a faith that doesn't really reckon with some of the realities of the world, and so it is going to be sort of insufficient to standing up to Ahab at the end of the day. He's on his way, Starbuck, but his faith has not yet confronted some of the things that it needs to confront in order to really be faith. He's on the journey. He's not there. That's Starbuck, I think. Next comes Stubb. And Stubb, we won't even read. Stubb has like a page and a half long soliloquy. But here's the important thing to see with Stubb is that just as in some sense, faith requires Starbuck to stand outside of the situation and not enter into it fully. It's not, Starbuck's faith does not call him fully to the world. Stubb's comedy, his comedic outlook, his religion of laughter almost also has him standing outside of the world, right? You guys have seen comics. You know how comics do it. You stand outside of a situation and you interpret it in a funny way and you criticize it. And there's a sense that Melville has that Stubb has made sort of a religion out of a comic, which can't quite face up to the realities of the suffering of others. Oops. Okay. Hopefully that didn't cut out there. My computer just went blank for a second. Okay. Not that this is an important point. It is. No, it is an important point. Here's the idea. I'll read you just a passage of Stubb. Stubb goes into this long thing about the zodiac, and he starts reading all the signs of the zodiac into the coin, and he says, there's a sermon now written high heaven, the sun goes through it every year and comes out of it alive and hearty, jolly he aloft there wheels through the toil and trouble, and so alow here does jolly Stubb. Oh, jolly's the word for ye. Adieu de bloom. Okay, so what word does Stubb take from this? From looking at the doubloon, what lesson does he take? Jolly, right? Jollity is the idea. Just have a laugh at things. And this is fine and well and good when suffering happens to you, right? When you are suffering, it's good to laugh. But when suffering happens to somebody else, suffering happens to your neighbor, something befalls your neighbor, laughter is not the right response. It's not the appropriate response. Stubb's laughter doesn't have enough to respond to the questions that Ahab has raised about the suffering and injustice of the world. And neither does Starbuck's faith. Starbuck just says, well, I believe. Whatever the facts of suffering, I believe. And Stubb is can't really admit the facts of suffering because he's only seeing the jollity everywhere. Okay, Starbuck and Stubb. They're sort of opposite sides of the same coin. Ahab is going to say this a little bit later. Next, we get Flask, and Flask is sort of the least sympathetic. I got a lot of sympathy with Starbuck. I have a lot of sympathy with Stubb. Flask, though, is sort of he's maybe one of the more cruel characters in a way, and it's important to see in what his cruelty consists. Remember he says about the whale, let me, he's killing the whale, and he says let me just prick him there just this once. And in a way, he's killing this beautiful thing, and it doesn't mean anything to him. He trivializes it. Flask trivializes everything. He looks at the doubloon and he says, I see nothing here but a round thing made of gold. And whoever raises a certain whale, this round thing belongs to him. So what's all this staring been about? It's worth $16, that's true, and 2 cents a cigar, that's 960 cigars, and et cetera. And so he goes into calculations. Flask, in a way, represents the calculating mind that looks at the world, that looks at the grove of trees and thinks how much could I sell this for, right? He looks at the doubloon, he says, it's just gold, it's worth $16. Why is everybody staring, right? This is in some ways the more modern mindset, and it's a more nihilistic mindset of why even try? Why even try to look for why try to build a significant world? Why try to build a meaningful life? Instead, we'll just know what the price of everything is. And he's I like cigars, I like pipes as much as Stubb does. So I will just see how many I could buy with this doubloon and try to raise the whale first and get out ahead and fatten my bank account. it's hard. Flask, his interpretation is a little bit hard for me. And I think for Melville too, he's sort of the lowest common denominator of the modern individual in some ways. Always utilitarian, always calculating, instrumental. Everything's just a means to an end. Nothing really there's like terrible significance for him. Okay. We get a couple other characters. We'll skip those guys and we'll just look at Pip here. When Pip comes, we talked about the importance of Pip, how his something in his soul was drowned, though his body stayed afloat, and he's experienced this catastrophe that has annihilated his sense of self. And so when Pip looks at, and it's made him into like a kind of holy fool. They talk about his unearthly idiot face. And Pip says when he looks at the balloon, I look, you look, he looks, we look, ye look, they look. And, it's like, oh, is he studying grammar? No, I mean, yes, he's like conjugating in a sense, but what he's doing is he's summing up in a way these varying perspectives, right? I, you, we, they, these are all perspectives on the world. They're all perspectives on the doubloon. And what is the precise verb that he's conjugating here? That he's moving through the pronouns for? It's the verb look, right? This is the task of philosophy that we're all doing. We're all looking at the world. We're all reading the world, and we all have these like different things. And Pip is, Ahab is the opposite of Pip, right? Ahab just brings the I. Everything is egotistical for him. It's about me. I just see myself in everything. And Pip has no self anymore. Pip, brings no self to it. So he's like, I, you, me, we, she, it. It's all the same for Pip. And Pip is sort of like the danger of like losing yourself, whereas Ahab is the danger of like reifying the self and raising the self up to the first principle. And together they make these really interesting complements, Pip and Ahab, as they're reading this doubloon. You guys, this is one reason people say that reading literature can help us become wise, right? It's not just that we read a passage like this and we take like moral lessons from it about like, don't be selfish, or like justice and kindness and courage and all the virtues. I mean, you could do that stuff like I'm doing here. But you could also just like tell people about those things. You don't really need this whole complicated story and the characters and the symbols and like digging beneath the layers. In fact, it'd probably be easier for most of us, most of the time, to like get rid of the story altogether and just like paraphrase the moral message. I'm sure Ron Swanson would actually like prefer that, get rid of the story and just like tell me what it means. But as we all know, being wise is more than just a matter of like memorizing. Practice something crucial that everybody in the doubloon chapter is practicing. They're practicing hermeneutics, right? They're practicing interpreting reality, looking at the world, reading the world. And that's what wisdom is at its core, right? We need to get better at interpreting the world correctly. We're all looking at the same text, and yet we see the world in a totally different way. Who is right? How would we know, right? Here's the secret that literature, that Moby-Dick especially, its multiplicity of perspectives, is trying to teach you. It's trying to teach you that the real task is not just to become a better reader of books, but to become a better reader of the world around you. And becoming a good reader of this book will help give you practice at this. Okay, just because they're all seeing like a different thing in the doubloon, does that mean that there's no reality to see? No. Not at all. Just because we're all seeing different things in the world, does that mean that there's no reality there? No, it just means that reality is always a process, not a fact, right? The facts are part of reality, but really what reality is the dialectical hermeneutical process of our engagement with the world, with fact. Reality is found only in its discovery. Reality is the discovery of reality. And between like me and reality, there's always a veil. Nobody's ever going to perceive the world directly, but we get better at it by interpretation. Interpretation is how we join. There's a philosopher named Wittgenstein, Ludwig Wittgenstein, and he said, this is a famous passage of his. He says, "Philosophy is a leaky boat, which must be repaired while at sea." right? Philosophy is a leaky boat which must be repaired while at sea. We're never going to be able to like step outside of the world and just be able to look at it and like see it and like there it is, and just pin it down. No, we're always doing philosophy like in the moment. We're always a part of the world that we're trying to interpret. This is the hermeneutic circle, is this leaky boat that we're repairing while we're sailing. It's a very imperfect tool, philosophy, hermeneutics, but it's what we have, and it can get us around, right? It'll get you from one place to the other, if you keep at it. So there is hope there. It's not just like the boat's going to sink. The boat could keep taking you to many different places if you keep repairing it, keep interpreting things correctly, keep asking what is the significance that lurks below things. Really, this chapter takes us back to Job in many ways. When we question the suffering and the injustice of the world, we're always, and what it means, what the significance of it, we're always back in the realm of Job. Remember when Job is like, what is justice? What is justice? Why is this being done? Why am I suffering? God's response is not to like give him a like formulaic propositional answer. God responds, look at the gazelle, look at the whale, look at the whole beauty of the universe from like the heavens all the way down to the foundations of the earth, and just look. That's God's response. It's like, look. And what he's really saying, you could interpret it as saying like God doesn't have the answer and he's being defensive and he says, just look at this. You can't know, just look at this. But you could also say that what God is saying in Job, what Job is saying is, here's the answer. It's right in front of you. And the answer is beauty, right? Beauty is the answer. God is going to lay out before Job this like catalog of all the beautiful things in the world. So it's weird. Job asks, what is justice? What is justice? And God's response is beauty. Here it is. You just got to see it. And then you'll know. There's a wonderful poem by a poet who died a few years ago. His name is Jack Gilbert, and his poem is called A Brief for the Defense. A Brief for the Defense. And what he's doing is sort of like defending the world's goodness against like Ahab and the questioners who would say like, how can there be good when there's so much suffering in the world? And the poem begins with this catalog of suffering, and it's really, really bleak. But it ends by saying this. He says, we must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. I'll say that again. We must have the stubbornness to accept our gladness in the ruthless furnace of this world. To make injustice the only measure of our attention is to praise the devil. What does he mean here? He's saying that there is suffering, there is injustice, but there's also gladness, there's also joy, there's also beauty, and we have to have the stubbornness to hold on to beauty and gladness and joy. Otherwise, if we only look at like the realities of suffering as Ahab does, then that's to praise the devil. The writer Dostoevsky said at one point, he's got this like very cryptic saying that people always talk about, like, what does he mean by this? And he says, beauty will save the world. I think today when we hear that word beauty, we're a little suspicious of it, rightly, because we think of like, Instagram, the beautiful is the Instagrammable or something. But that's not what he means by beauty. He means beauty as like the gleam of the real. Beauty is the light that shines out from what is good. And so the task of perceiving beauty is maybe like the most important thing you can do to keep yourself from becoming like a nihilist or an investment banker. You have to like understand how to see the gladness and understand how to see the beauty. Otherwise, you're going to miss the significance if you just focus on the dark stuff. Beauty and gladness and joy, seeing these things, that is the real goal of philosophy. It's the real goal of a human life that will save us from meaninglessness and despair. This sort of stuff, I know in literature class we read a lot of poetry, and you think, oh, this is kind of like this fun ornament on the real like tree of my education. But it's like, no, this is your education. This is the tree. This is the trunk of the tree, is beauty. Your education in the humanities, and what it means to flourish as a human being is to be able to perceive beauty and gladness and joy. And that's how you defend. That's like the defense, of the world. That's how you defend the world. That's how you defend God. Is not through like arguments, but is through like just the seeing the beauty in it and showing it to others. Right. That's why we read poetry. That's why poetry, even though it's small and insignificant and makes nothing happen, is the realist, it gets us in touch with the realist of the real stuff. Beauty. Okay. Let's look at the opposite of this attitude, where you see the world and you see the beauty. Boils down to this irrational quest for vengeance that he can't let go of. Why, though, is revenge irrational? Revenge is irrational because if somebody harms you, that harm can never actually fully be redressed, right? When you lose something, when somebody hurts you, you lose that thing for good, right? Whatever they could supply to like make amends could never return you to your prior state of not being hurt. So, okay, say you're in first grade and someone calls you like a stupid meanie face and pushes you down on the playground. If they hurt you and the damage is done, and you don't have a time machine to go back and undo that damage, and even if they like, share their Jello with you for dessert going forward, it's not really gonna fix things, the initial hurt. This is a problem. It's a problem because it means that the wronged, those of us who are wronged, have an eternal warrant for vengeance, and we pose a threat to peace. Because if we're wronged, there's nothing that we can do to right the wrong, and so we can just keep sort of like creating more wrongs in our quest for vengeance, and on it goes. This is why vengeance is, irrational. Is that no matter if you get revenge on the person who pushed you down and called you a stupid meanie head, it doesn't matter. It's never going to like fix the thing. Revenge is fundamentally irrational, and yet forgiveness is irrational too, right? If you're the one who's been injured, then you have to go forgive that person. You're the injured party, and you're being asked to sacrifice something, but you're the one who was injured, and now you have to sacrifice something on top of that. You're asked to sacrifice your sense of righteous grievance, which is all you really have left in this situation. So forgiveness is not like fully rational, not really sort of like, it can't balance the checkbook really either. So we're faced with a situation where revenge is irrational and forgiveness is irrational. And what do we do? Now, there's a recent essay by a writer named Elizabeth Brunig, who's very, very smart. And in her essay, she comes up with this phrase called the kingdom of damage. And I think that this phrase describes Ahab perfectly, right? Ahab has been wounded. He's been damaged. And rather than like forgiving and letting go of that damage, he's going to like go out and he's going to live in the kingdom of damage. And he's going to live in his revenge until he can satisfy it. In some sense, so here I'll read you a little bit of a piece from her essay. She says, in some sense, our damage is our own kingdom, right? That describes Ahab so perfectly. She says, it's an interior place of pain and outrage, but also moral clarity, where we know that in being angry over having been wronged, we are in the right. Forgiving somebody for hurting you is excruciating because it requires you to follow an unjust wrong with a personal sacrifice. And yet, forgiveness is also good and maybe even a necessary ingredient for peace as we know it, because it has the capacity to halt an otherwise endless campaign for vengeance. That's nice, right? Ahab is on this endless campaign for vengeance because he can't forgive. He can't make peace. He can't get over it. Beautiful. Forgiveness is beautiful and revenge isn't. And so you can either choose, like Ahab, to live in your kingdom of damage, or you can choose to live in this kingdom of beauty and forgiveness and peace. I say this again because somebody's got to tell you this at some point in your life, right? Dostoevsky says this: beauty will save the world. Beauty, not reason, is the path to peace, because reason won't tell you why you should forgive this person, right? It is a more beautiful thing to forgive than to hold something in vengeance. And this is what Ahab can't do, right? He's been hurt and he creates this kingdom of pain on his own that he lives in. So in chapter 100, when he sees the Samuel Enderby of London and he meets the captain, and he says, "Have you seen Moby-Dick?" This is always Ahab's question. And the captain says, "Yeah, I have. I saw him. And take a look at my missing arm. This is what I had to show for it. And I'm never going to go after that whale again." And so Ahab says, "Did you see him again?" And he says, "Yeah, I've seen him twice. I've seen Moby-Dick twice after he took my arm." And Ahab's like, but you didn't get him? You didn't, like, you couldn't fasten your spear in? And he says, I didn't try, Ahab. And here's what he says: ain't one limb enough? Ain't one limb enough? You've heard this before, right? An eye for an eye makes the world blind. If you lose one of your eyes and then you take somebody else's eye and then take your eye and an eye for, and pretty soon we're all blind, you get the idea. It isn't one limb enough? Isn't one eye enough? At some point, you have to sort of decide to halt that cycle of revenge. And that's exactly what Ahab refuses to do. He chooses instead to live inside his kingdom of damage instead of to live inside of the miracle and the beauty of forgiveness. This is page 452. This is sort of the central tension in the novel in a way. The English captain is like, Moby-Dick is welcome to the arm he has, since I can't help it, can't do anything about it. And I didn't know him then, but not to another one. No more white whales for me. I've lowered for him once, that has satisfied me. There would be great glory in killing him, I know that, but there's a sharp and like a lot of precious sperm in him. But hark ye, he's best let alone. Don't you think so, Captain? He says, glancing at Ahab's ivory leg. Right? Look, we all face damage in our lives. We all have wrongs and injustices done to us. We don't have a choice about that, right? You may be maimed by something, missing a limb, but you do have a choice about whether you choose to live in that kingdom of damage, or you can just say, I couldn't help that, but now I know, and no more white whales for me. He's best left alone. I'm going to kind of move on with this. Some whales are not worth lowering after, right? You're only going to end up hurting yourself. But Ahab is past the point of caring about himself. That's sort of the dehumanizing logic of revenge. Ahab's an anti-hero because he won't let go of the fact of his suffering. He's going to hold on to his revenge until it takes him down, and maybe take some other people down with it. So this is why we have to be very careful about holding on to our damage, holding on to our grievances, right? If this is a kingdom, it's sort of like a poisoned kingdom. Why not get rid of it? Why not sell it? Why not sell your title to that land, to that kingdom of damage, and get rid of your sense of entitlement to that anger? Ahab, what makes him a hero is that he is going to push forward anyway, even though it's going to hurt him. But it's also he makes him an anti-hero because you see that he's going to hurt others as well. That's the logic of revenge. So, okay, maybe this is enough for this week. Instead of revenge this week, choose beauty, right? Choose gladness, choose forgiveness. Offer, instead of a defense to the injustices around you, instead of trying to defend yourself, offer instead something new and beautiful, and offer forgiveness. See what happens. See if that changes the outcome and gives you a better ending than Ahab, right? Some of us have been maimed. We've all lost some digits, some arms and legs, maybe more, but we're all still afloat. We've still got our crews. We've still got our friends. We've still got our families, our people around us. And there are still adventures maybe that we can have if we can let go of our plans for revenge and not lower after the whale and not live in that kingdom of damage and sail on toward a different kind of sunset. This is a possibility that is here in Moby-Dick that Ahab does not choose. Nonetheless, it's a little cheesy, I know, but it's kind of true. So think about that stuff this week. Look forward to seeing some of your responses. And this is long enough, so I will sign off. All right, take care. See you guys later.